She was 18 years old, and she was standing on the front steps of the house she had grown up in, watching the sun come up over the rooftops of Brookline, Massachusetts, with a suitcase that she had not packed sitting at her feet. The suitcase was the same one her family had brought from Nigeria when she was 2 years old. Burgundy canvas, with a broken wheel on the left rear corner that her father had been meaning to fix for years. Her mother had packed it carefully. Zara could tell by the way the clothes were folded, precise, deliberate, the way her mother did everything. There was a note on top of the suitcase written on the back of a grocery receipt in her mother's small, careful handwriting. And there was an envelope tucked beneath the note with $300 in cash inside. Zara read the note once, then she read it again. "We love you, Zara, but we cannot watch you do this to yourself. When you are ready to be serious about your future, you know where we are." She folded the note along its original crease and put it in the pocket of her jacket. She picked up the suitcase. She walked down the front steps and turned left and did not look back at the house. Not once. Not even at the corner. She was 18 years old, and it was her birthday. The neighborhood was quiet at that hour, the way Boston suburbs are quiet on early weekday mornings. The particular silence of sprinklers and distant highway noise, and the occasional dog being walked by someone in a fleece jacket who does not want to make eye contact. Zara walked 4 blocks to the bus stop on Harvard Street and sat on the bench and put the suitcase between her feet and stared at the pavement until the number 66 came. She did not cry. She had decided the night before that she was not going to cry, and she was going to hold to that decision the way she held to most decisions, quietly and completely, the way her grandmother had taught her. Her grandmother's name had been Nkechi. She had come from Lagos every year when Zara was small, staying for a month at a time, filling the Brookline house with the smell of groundnut soup and the sound of her laughter and the particular texture of her presence, which was warm and certain and unhurried, in a way that nobody else Zara had ever known could quite manage. Nkechi had given Zara a leather journal when she was 9 and told her to write down everything she noticed. She had taught Zara to braid her own hair and to read clouds before rain and to pay attention to the weight and sound of words. She had read Walt Whitman aloud to Zara on Sunday afternoons, and Robert Frost and Gwendolyn Brooks sitting in the small backyard of the Brookline house with glasses of cold water and a shared blanket when the afternoons turned cool. She had been in every way that mattered the person Zara had learned to be from. Nkechi had died when Zara was 14. A stroke sudden in Lagos in August. Zara had not been allowed to travel for the funeral. Her parents said it was too expensive and too disruptive to the school year, and they were not wrong about either of those things, but that had not made it easier to carry. What Nkechi had left her, besides the journals and the habit of reading and the knowledge of how to pay attention, was a ring. A thin gold band set with a small turquoise stone worn smooth on one side from decades on Nkechi's right index finger. When Nkechi put the ring on Zara's finger for the first time, she had said something that Zara had written down that same evening in her journal and had not forgotten since. "This ring will take you somewhere you don't expect," she had said. "Rings know things." Zara wore the ring on her right index finger the same way Nkechi had. She touched it when she was nervous. She touched it now, sitting on the number 66 bus, heading toward downtown Boston, the burgundy suitcase wedged against her knees, $300 in her jacket pocket. She touched it and thought about where to go. The family had come to America in the mid-1990s, her father first on a work visa, her mother joining him a year later when he had a job settled and a small apartment in Cambridge. Her father was a software engineer. A good one. He had built his career with the same steady patience he applied to everything, learning each new system, adapting to each new platform, never complaining, always reliable. Her mother was a nurse practitioner at a hospital in Boston, the kind of nurse that patients asked for by name, and that younger nurses followed around trying to learn something. They had worked extremely hard to build a specific kind of life, a stable, respectable, middle class American life with a mortgage and good schools, and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from knowing you earned every single thing you have. And they could not understand, no matter how many times Zara tried to explain it any kind of ambition that did not involve building the same kind of life. They wanted her to become a doctor, or a lawyer, or, at minimum, an engineer. Something with a clear title and a clear salary and a clear path forward that other people could recognize and respect. They had not come to America, her father said more than once, for their daughter to spend her life writing poems that nobody would pay her for. Writing was a hobby. You could have a hobby, but you could not build a life on a hobby, and a life was what they were asking her to build. Zara had not stopped writing. Not once. She had kept her grades exactly where her parents needed them to be, because keeping her grades up was the price of the fragile peace in the Brookline house, and she had understood that price and paid it without complaint. But every free hour she had, she wrote. She filled journal after journal. She submitted to her school's literary magazine. She won a small regional poetry contest when she was 16, and her poem was published in a collection distributed to schools across New England. Her parents read the poem and told her it was nice, and then asked her about her MCAT preparation timeline. When she was 17, she applied to the Alderton Writing Program at a small liberal arts university in New Hampshire. The Alderton program was one of the most prestigious undergraduate creative writing programs in New England. Acceptance rate under 4%. She did not tell her parents she was applying. She wrote her application essays over 6 weeks during lunch periods and free periods and late nights after her parents had gone to sleep. She submitted the application in November and spent the next 3 months not thinking about it, because thinking about it was too large a thing to hold while also maintaining the peace. The acceptance letter arrived in March in a thick cream-colored envelope with the university seal embossed in dark green on the flap. Zara's father picked up the mail that day. He opened the letter, read it, and left it on the kitchen table without saying anything. Her mother read it after dinner. Her parents sat in the kitchen for a long time, speaking quietly in Igbo. Zara sat in her room and listened to the cadence of the language. She had only partially learned her grandmother's language, the language that meant the conversation was too serious for English. When they came to her room, they were calm. That was almost the hardest part. They were not shouting. They were not angry in a way that burned hot and fast and ended. They were measured, deliberate. Her father sat on the edge of her desk chair and spoke in the tone he used when explaining something that he considered to be simply and factually true. They would not pay for it. They could not support a decision like this. Writing was not a career path. The Alderton program was not a law school or a medical school. If she wanted to be a writer, she could be a writer on her own time, in her own life, after she had established herself in a profession that could support her. But not on their resources. Not while she was living in their home and depending on their support. Her mother said something near the end of the conversation that Zara had tried in the months since to put down somewhere she could not quite reach. She had said it quietly, almost gently, which made it worse. If you choose this path, you are choosing it alone. We love you, but we cannot watch you make this choice. Zara had not argued. Arguing was like pressing against a wall. The wall does not move, and you only tire yourself. She went back to her room and wrote in her journal for 2 hours, filling 12 pages with everything she was feeling and everything she was going to do next. That had been in April. She graduated in June. She spent the summer working a shift at a coffee shop near the university and saving money, not saying anything, not making any decisions that she was not ready to make. She told herself she would figure it out. She told herself there was a way through this that she had not found yet. And she had believed that mostly right up until the night before her birthday, when she went to use the family computer to print a bus schedule and found her father's email account open on the screen. She had not meant to read it. She had leaned in to move the cursor to close the window, and the subject line of the most recent email had stopped her cold. Withdrawal of application. Zara Adeyemi Alderton Writing Program. She had read the email, then she had read the thread below it, going back to October, 4 months before she had even submitted her application. Her father had contacted the university's admissions office in the fall before she applied to ask what the procedure was for withdrawing a student's application without the student's knowledge. The admissions office had explained that they could not process a withdrawal from someone other than the applicant. Her father had followed up again in March after the acceptance letter arrived. He had explained that his daughter was a minor and that the family did not consent to her enrollment. The admissions office had eventually responded to explain that Zara was 18 and that only she could withdraw her own application, but that they would note the family's position in her file. There was a final email in the thread sent 2 weeks ago. Her father had contacted the university's financial aid office and explained that the family would not be completing the FAE FSA and would not be cooperating with any financial aid application. Without her parents' cooperation, Zara would not qualify for enough aid to attend. She had sat in front of the computer screen for a long time. The house was quiet. Her parents were asleep. She could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, and from somewhere outside the sound of a car moving slowly down the street. She had read the emails one more time to make sure she understood what she was reading. Then she had gone to her room and written in her journal for the last time in that house, and in the morning her suitcase had been packed and sitting by the door. That had been 4 days ago. Now she was in a youth hostel in downtown Boston called the Harbor Light, which cost $32 a night and smelled of instant noodles and other people's ambitions. She had a bottom bunk in a room she shared with 5 other women. She had her burgundy suitcase and her canvas tote bag with 3 journals inside and her laptop. She had $180 left. She had applied for 6 jobs in 4 days and heard back from none of them. She had called the Alderton Writing Program's financial aid office and explained her situation to a woman who was sympathetic and thorough, and ultimately unable to help because without her parents' cooperation on the financial aid application, the numbers simply did not work. On the morning of the 5th day, Zara sat in the hostel's common room at a table by the window with her laptop and a cup of the free coffee that the hostel provided, which tasted approximately like hot brown water, and she made herself think clearly. $180, no job, no school, no family she could call, a canvas bag of journals, and a turquoise ring. She needed to make a decision, and the decision could not wait, because in 3 more days, the money would be gone. She opened her laptop and began searching. She had been searching on and off for 5 days. She had looked at every obvious option. Shared apartments in Boston were far beyond her budget. The cheapest rooms were $400 a month minimum and required first, last, and security. She had looked at programs for young adults in crisis housing situations and found wait lists of 4 to 6 months. She had looked at jobs with room and board, ranch work, farm work, live-in care positions, and had applied for several but had no experience and no car and no references from anyone who would not. If called, explained that her daughter had been asked to leave the family home because she wanted to study writing. She searched cheap housing, rural America. She searched affordable homestead property. She searched places to live under $500 total. She was on the fourth page of results when she found a link to a state government website she had not seen before. Vermont Rural Heritage Preservation Act, a program administered by the Vermont Agency of Commerce and Community Development in partnership with county governments across the state. The program was designed to address the problem of abandoned rural properties that had fallen into disrepair and represented a loss of Vermont's historical and architectural heritage. Under the program, qualifying properties defined as structures of historical or architectural significance that had been abandoned for at least 20 years and were currently held by county administrations through tax forfeiture or elapsed inheritance could be transferred to private ownership for a nominal fee of $1 in exchange for a binding commitment from the new owner to restore and preserve the property and to establish primary residency for a minimum of 5 years. Zara read the program description twice. Then she clicked through to the property listings. There were 11 properties currently available. Most of them were in worse condition than she could have imagined doing anything with. Collapsed foundations, walls open to the sky. Locations so remote that the listings included phrases like seasonal road access only or no bridge, ford crossing required. She scrolled through them slowly, reading each one. The ninth listing was different. The property was located in Caledonia County in the northeastern part of Vermont, approximately 4 miles on foot from the small town of Lindenville. The structure was described as a single-story fieldstone and timber farmhouse constructed circa 1889, approximately 900 square feet, one main room, with original hearth, one sleeping loft. The property included a half-acre of cleared land with evidence of a former kitchen garden and was bordered on 3 sides by second-growth forest. It had been abandoned since 1958. The county had acquired title through tax forfeiture in 1963 and had been unable to find a buyer or restorer in the decades since. The listing included 4 photographs. The first showed the exterior of the house from the path, and Zara looked at it for a long time. The walls were fieldstone, the particular gray-green granite of northern Vermont, rough cut and thick laid with mortar that had crumbled in places but not failed. The stones themselves were solid plumb, the walls carrying their 67 years of abandonment with a kind of dignity. The roof was slate, the original thick Vermont slate, missing tiles near the center ridge, where a section had sagged inward. A stone chimney rose from the center of the structure, massive one of its upper courses leaning slightly but standing. The oak door at the front was closed, weathered to silver gray, still hanging true on its iron hinges. Around the house, wild sumac and blackberry had grown into dense thickets along the south wall, and a collapsed wooden fence marked the boundary of what had once been a garden. Beyond the house, in every direction, the Vermont hills rolled away in deep green and rust and gold. It looked like something from a poem she had not written yet. Zara looked at the photograph for a long time. She thought about her grandmother sitting in the backyard in Brookline, reading Robert Frost aloud on September afternoons. She thought about the particular quality of silence she was looking for, and had never found in any of the places she had been so far. She thought about the note in her father's email thread, and the acceptance letter in the cream-colored envelope, and the $180 in her jacket pocket. She touched the turquoise ring on her right index finger. Rings know things. She had enough money for a bus ticket to Burlington, Vermont. Barely. with a little left over for a few nights at a hostel in the area while she sorted out the paperwork. She had her journals, she had her laptop, she had the ring, she had to try. 2 days later, Zara was on a Greyhound bus heading north out of Boston on I-93, watching the Massachusetts suburbs give way to the New Hampshire hills and then to the wider, steeper, darker landscape of Vermont. The bus smelled of diesel and someone's fast food and the particular staleness of long travel. She had her suitcase in the overhead rack and her canvas bag on her lap in a window seat, and she watched the Vermont hills come up green and gold in the October light and felt something she could not entirely name. Not happiness exactly. Something older than happiness. Something more like recognition. She arrived in Burlington in the late afternoon and found a hostel near the waterfront that charged $28 a night. She showered and ate a granola bar and slept for 9 hours. The next morning, she took a local bus east from Burlington towards St. Johnsbury, and then a smaller regional bus down through the Caledonia County Hill Country to Lyndonville. Lyndonville was small in the way that Vermont hill towns are small, not emptied out or defeated, but compact, self-contained. Organized around a common that had been there since before the Revolution. A white congregational church. A general store with a hand-painted sign. A diner called Pearlie's. A volunteer fire station with a gleaming red truck visible through the open bay doors. A small brick post office. And, at the far end of the common, a 2-story white clapboard building that housed the Caledonia County Administrative Offices, with a carved wooden sign above the door that read, County Clerk and Registry of Deeds. Zara walked across the common with her suitcase rolling behind her on the brick sidewalk and pushed open the door of the county office. The woman behind the counter was in her early 60s, with steel gray hair cut practical and short reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and the precise, unhurried manner of someone who had been doing the same job for a long time and had made peace with the full range of what that job involved. Her nameplate said Ruth Fenwick, County Clerk. Ruth looked at the printed listing Zara set on the counter. She looked at Zara. She looked at the listing again. The old Hargrove place, she said. You came about the Hargrove place. Yes, ma'am. You came from Boston, yes, ma'am. Ruth took off her reading glasses and set them on the counter and studied Zara with the frank, unhurried attention of someone who had learned to read people quickly and accurately. There was nothing unkind in it. It was simply a look that took stock. You understand what you're asking to take on, she said. That property has been listed 9 years. 2 people came out to look at it before you, and both of them drove away without signing anything. One of them left a note. She paused. I still have the note if you want to see it. Yes, Zara said. Please. Ruth went into the back room and came out a minute later with a small square of notepaper in a plastic sleeve. She set it on the counter, and Zara leaned in to read it. The handwriting was careful, deliberate. There's something in this house that's waiting. I'm not who it's waiting for. Zara straightened up. She looked at Ruth. I'd like to see the paperwork, she said. Ruth held her gaze for a long moment. You're 18, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am. You're alone. Yes, ma'am. The property has no electrical service to that section of the road. The well is on site but untested. Access is a 4-mile footpath from the county road. No vehicle access. The structure is standing, but the roof needs significant repair, and the interior has not been entered or assessed since 2016. Zara said nothing. She waited. Ruth looked at her for another moment, then something shifted in her expression. Not softness exactly, but a recognition of something. She pulled a form from the drawer beneath the counter and uncapped a pen. "I've been clerk of this county for 19 years," she said, filling in the header of the form in her careful hand. "In 19 years, not one person has come from out of state for a $1 property. The folks who come are usually developers looking to flip or retirees who think they want a project and change their minds when they see the reality." She paused without looking up. "You don't look like either of those." "I'm not," Zara said. "No," Ruth said. "I can see that." She finished filling out the form and slid it across the counter with the pen. She looked at Zara's right hand as Zara reached for the pen, and her eyes settled briefly on the turquoise ring. Zara signed where Ruth indicated. Ruth countersigned, stamped the form with the county seal, and pulled a dollar coin from the petty cash drawer. "The transfer fee," she said, sliding the coin across the counter. "You keep your money for food." She began writing something on a separate piece of paper. A hand-drawn map, Zara realized, detailed and careful, with the county road marked and the footpath indicated with a dotted line, and small landmarks noted in Ruth's small handwriting. "Stonewall Junction Red Barn, visible on left, then follow fence line uphill. Welcome to Caledonia County. Miss Adiemi," Ruth said, sliding the map across the counter. She paused. "I'm curious to see what the house makes of you." The walk from the county road to the Hargrove property took just over an hour. The footpath was well defined enough someone had used it within the last few years, but uneven, crossing two shallow streams on flat stepping stones and climbing steadily through stands of sugar maple and yellow birch that had turned fully with the October cold. The afternoon light came through the canopy in long horizontal bars, gold and amber, moving slowly across the fallen leaves. Zara pulled her suitcase where the path allowed and carried it where it did not. She was not thinking about the difficulty. She was watching the light and listening to the woods, and feeling with each step uphill the particular quality of the silence she had been looking for. The house appeared over a rise in the path, and when it did, Zara stopped walking. It was exactly as the photograph had shown it, and entirely different from what the photograph had prepared her for. The walls rose solid and massive from the hillside, the gray-green granite catching the afternoon light and giving it back with a warmth that stone should not logically have, but indisputably did. The roof, damaged at its center ridge, still covered most of the structure, the surviving slate, thick and dark and mossy, the color of deep water. The chimney stood against the pale October sky, enormous, its slightly leaning top course giving it the particular dignity of things that have endured. The oak door hung straight and still in its iron hinges, silver with age and weather solid. Around the house, the evidence of the life that had been lived there was still present if you knew how to look. The collapsed garden fence along the south wall, the iron pump beside the well, casing its handle gone to rust, but its body still upright. A large flat stone beside the door that had clearly served as a doorstep for decades. Wild roses along the south wall, their canes gone to thorny masses, their hips red in the October cold. Zara stood on the path and looked at the house for a long time. She thought about Nkechi, who had loved Robert Frost and had read him aloud in a backyard in Brookline on September afternoons. She thought about the line she had memorized from one of those afternoons, sitting wrapped in a blanket, drinking cold water, and watching her grandmother's face as she read, "The land was ours before we were the land's." She thought about the note the previous visitor had left. "There's something in this house that's waiting." She picked up her suitcase and walked forward. The oak door was not locked. The handle was a simple iron thumb latch, cold to the touch. And when Zara pressed it and pushed, the door swung inward on its hinges, with a long, low groan that sounded less like protest and more like relief. She stepped inside. The interior was a single room, exactly as the listing had described, but larger than the description had suggested, not in square footage, but in presence. The ceiling was open to the rafters, the original heavy timber framing of the 1889 construction, still in place, the wood gone dark with age, but not rotted, not failed. The walls were the rough interior face of the same field stone that formed the exterior, uneven, and textured the stone faces, showing the marks of the original dressing tools. The floor was broad plank pine, warped in places, and covered in decades of dust and fallen grit, but solid underfoot. Light came in through two windows, their glass long broken. The openings covered with what remained of wooden shutters, most of the light arriving through the damaged center of the roof, a pale October column of it falling across the middle of the room. At the far end of the room, taking up almost the entire north wall, was the hearth. Zara had not fully understood from the photographs what the hearth would mean in the space. It was enormous. Not just large, but architecturally dominant. A fireplace of rough dressed granite with an opening wide enough and tall enough to stand inside a massive granite lintel, stone spanning the top of the opening. An iron crane still mounted on a hook inside the firebox for holding pots above the fire. The hearthstone in front of the opening was a single great slab of gray granite, 5 feet wide and 3 feet deep dark, with a century of ash and soot and use. Above the lintel, a wooden mantel shelf ran the width of the chimney. Breast heavy, hand hewn. The wood worn smooth in the center from generations of hands resting on it. The room smelled of stone and old wood, and the particular clean cold of a space that has been closed for a long time. It was absolutely silent. Whatever the Vermont hills outside were doing whined in the maples. A far off creek, the settling of late afternoon, none of it entered the room. The silence was complete and specific. The silence of a space that had been waiting. Zara set her suitcase down by the door and walked to the hearth slowly. She walked the way you walk when you are trying to understand something that you cannot yet put into words. She looked at the hearthstone, at the iron crane, at the granite walls of the firebox, blackened by 100 years of cooking fires. She looked at the mantel shelf above, empty now, dust covered, a single dead moth lying on its side in the corner. She put her hand flat on the hearthstone. The stone was cold. She kept her hand there anyway, feeling the weight and age of it, feeling the particular stillness of a thing that has been in place for a very long time and intends to remain. She stayed like that for a while, just breathing, just letting herself understand where she was. She was on a hillside in northern Vermont, in an abandoned house she had purchased for $1. She had $104 left in her jacket pocket. She had 3 journals and a laptop and a turquoise ring. She was 18 years old, and for the first time since she had walked down the front steps of her parents' house 4 days ago, she did not feel afraid. She felt something else entirely. Something that she would try in the months ahead to describe in poems and would keep finding insufficient words for, because the feeling was not a thing that words were quite the right shape to hold. It was the feeling of being in the right place. Not a comfortable place, not a safe place, not an easy place, but the right one. Zara lifted her hand from the hearthstone and was about to stand when she noticed something. Along the front edge of the hearthstone, where it met the wide plank pine floor, there was a gap. Not a crack in the stone itself, not settling, not damage. A deliberate gap, uniform, perhaps a quarter-inch wide, running the full width of the stone's front edge. The gap was the gap of a stone that was not mortared in place. She leaned closer and brushed along the edge with her fingertips. The underside edge of the hearthstone was smooth, dressed, flat cut with intention. She pressed down on the near edge of the stone with both hands. Nothing. She moved to the far edge and pressed down. The stone shifted. Not much. Perhaps a half inch of vertical play. A subtle, rocking, unmistakable once she had felt it. The hearthstone was resting on something. It was not fixed to the floor. It had been set here deliberately in a way that allowed it to be lifted. Zara stood up and went out to the collapsed garden fence and worked loose a length of old iron from what had been a gate hinge, heavy, about 18 inches long, slightly curved. She brought it inside and wedged one end into the gap along the front edge of the hearthstone and leaned her weight onto the other end. The hearthstone rose slowly. It was extraordinarily heavy, 200 pounds at minimum, probably more, but the leverage of the iron bar was enough to tip it up onto its back edge, and Zara held it there with the bar braced against the floor and looked at what was beneath. A cavity, not a natural gap in the subfloor. A constructed chamber lined on all four sides and on the bottom with flat stones set tight together, perhaps 2 feet wide and 3 feet long and 18 inches deep. Inside the cavity was something wrapped in dark oilcloth, she would realize later, heavy and waxed and still intact after all the decades it had spent in the dark. Zara eased the hearthstone back down carefully. She reached into the cavity and lifted the bundle out. It was heavier than she expected. She carried it to the mantel shelf and set it down. She stood in front of the mantel with the oilcloth bundle in front of her and the pale column of light falling through the damaged roof behind her and the great silent hearth at her back. She thought about the note Ruth had shown her. There's something in this house that's waiting. She began very carefully to untie the string. What she found inside, she would not fully understand for days. But in the moment she unwrapped the oilcloth and looked at what lay in front of her in the failing afternoon light, she understood one thing with complete certainty. Whatever this was, she was meant to find it. The October light was almost gone. The Vermont hills outside were going from gold to copper to the deep blue of early dark. The room was colder than it had been when she arrived, and Zara could see her breath in small clouds in the air in front of her face. She did not have candles. She did not have a sleeping bag. She did not have anything but what she had carried 4 miles up a hillside path on her first afternoon in Caledonia County. But she had found what the house had been keeping, and she was not going anywhere. The oilcloth bundle contained 3 things. Zara had unwrapped it in the last of the afternoon light, standing at the mantel shelf with cold fingers and held breath. And what she found had stopped her completely still, in a way that she would later try to describe in her journal and find she could not. Not because the words were insufficient, but because the feeling of that moment was too specific, too singular to survive the translation into language. The first thing was a tin box, small, roughly the size of a hardcover book. Its hinged lid sealed along 3 edges with a thin line of hardened wax that had gone brown with age. She set it aside. The second thing was a leather-bound journal, smaller than her own journals. Its cover worn at the corners and dark with handling a thin leather cord wrapped twice around it to keep it closed. The leather was stiff, but intact. Whatever had been sealed inside the oilcloth had kept the worst of the damp out. The third thing was a rosary. Simple dark wooden beads strung on a thin wire, a small brass crucifix at the end, worn smooth at the top of the cross, where someone had held it a very great number of times. Zara looked at these 3 things arranged on the dusty mantel shelf in the failing light, and understood that she could not properly examine any of them in the dark. She wrapped everything back in the oilcloth, not retying the string, but folding the cloth carefully over the objects and set the bundle in the corner of the mantel where it could not fall. Then she spent her first night in the Hargrove house. It was the hardest night she had spent since leaving Boston. She had a flannel shirt and a fleece jacket and the single wool blanket she had carried in her canvas bag because something had told her to pack it. The broken center section of the roof was directly above the middle of the room, 10 feet of open sky in the darkness above her, and the October cold came through it without interruption. She dragged her suitcase against the north wall beside the hearth, which gave at least the illusion of shelter, and sat with her back against the cold granite and her knees pulled up and the blanket around her shoulders, and watched the rectangle of open sky above her go from deep blue to black and fill with more stars than she had ever seen from inside a building. Around midnight, the rain began. It came in through the open roof section in a steady, cold curtain and hit the pine floor 6 feet from where she was sitting and spread in a widening dark pool toward the middle of the room. She moved her suitcase closer to the wall and watched the rain fall through the column of open ceiling and thought about leaving. She had enough money for a bus back to Burlington. She could be in a warm hostel bed by morning. She could admit that this had been too much, too fast, too far, and that she had made a mistake in the way that 18-year-olds are allowed to make mistakes, and she could go back and figure out something else. She put her right hand flat on the granite wall beside her. The stone was cold and rough and absolute. It had been standing since 1889. It had stood through Vermont winters and spring floods and decades of abandonment and whatever had happened inside it and outside it over the course of 130 years. It was not going anywhere. She touched the turquoise ring on her index finger. She stayed. She did not sleep. By the time the sky through the open roof began to go from black to gray, she was stiff and cold and running on something that was not quite energy, but was a reasonable substitute for it. The particular focused clarity that comes from having made a decision and committed to it and held to it through the worst hours of the night. She watched the gray become pale gold and listened to the Vermont morning come alive around the house. First the birds, then the wind in the maples, then the sound of a distant road somewhere below the hill. When the light was strong enough, she unwrapped the oilcloth bundle again and carried it to the window. She opened the tin box first. The wax seal cracked cleanly along the lid edge, and the lid swung back on its hinge. Inside, wrapped in a layer of waxed paper that had gone translucent and brittle with age, were pieces of jewelry. Small, delicate old. A pair of drop earrings set with garnets in gold settings, the gold worked in a fine filigree pattern. A thin gold chain with a small cross pendant, a ring not large. A simple band of yellow gold set with a single blue stone, the stone deep and clear, the color of deep water in afternoon light. A gold locket on a fine chain, which Zara opened with her thumbnail and found a small oval photograph inside. A young couple, the woman in a pale dress with her hair pinned up. The man in a suit with a white collar. Both of them looking at the camera with the formal solemnity of people who understood that this photograph would be permanent. She closed the locket gently and set it on the windowsill. Then she opened the journal. The leather cord unwrapped stiffly. The cover opened to a plain first page with a name written in ink that had faded from black to the color of old tea, Dorothy Calloway Hargrove. Her book. Below the name, a date. September 1941. Zara turned to the first entry. The handwriting was small and precise, the letters formed with care, the lines remarkably straight on the unlined page. She read slowly, holding the journal close to the window light. September 14th, 1941. My name is Dorothy Hargrove, called Dot, by everyone who knows me. I am 33 years old, and I live on the Hargrove property in Caledonia, County Vermont, which belonged to James's father before it came to us. James has enlisted. He leaves for Fort Devens on the 22nd, and I don't know when I will see him next. I am writing this down because I need somewhere to put it. Zara read the next entry. And the next. The journal covered 12 years of Dorothy Hargrove's life, from September 1941 to March 1958, in entries that ranged from a single line to several pages written at irregular intervals, the way people write when they are recording not events but states of mind. Dot wrote about James leaving for Fort Devens and then for the Pacific. She wrote about running the property alone through the winters of 1942 and 1943, cutting her own firewood, keeping the well from freezing, learning to do the things that James had always done without instruction because there was no one to instruct her in the things needed doing. She wrote about the cold and the isolation and the specific quality of waiting, not passive waiting, but active, effortful waiting, the kind that requires the same daily discipline as any physical labor. And she wrote about fear, not the fear of death exactly, though that was present, but the fear of the house, the fear of losing it. James had a mortgage on the property, small by any standard but real, and on a property that brought in almost no income. A nurse's wages from 2 days a week at the hospital in St. Johnsbury were barely enough to cover it. If anything went wrong, if she got sick, if the well failed, if she missed 2 payments, the bank in Lindenville would take the house, and the house was everything. The house was what James was coming home to. She could not lose the house. Entry dated October the 3rd, 1941. I have put our savings beneath the hearthstone. I know this sounds like an old woman's fear, but I have seen what banks do when times are hard. The money is safer under the stone than in any account. I have put the jewelry there too, the pieces that came from both our families. If something happens to me, whoever finds this will find what we valued most. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. Zara stopped at that line and read it again. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. She sat with those words for a moment. Then she kept reading. The entries through 1942 and 1943 recorded the slow rhythm of waiting. Brief letters from James, their contents described in careful summary. A hard winter, a neighbor's barn that burned. The maple grove coming into sugar season without James to help with the tapping. A cat that appeared at the door in February 1943 and stayed. Dot's voice in the journal was spare and undemonstrative, the voice of a woman who had learned to hold things tightly because loosening her grip meant losing them. But occasionally a sentence would open up and let something through a line about the particular quality of James's laugh, or the way the morning light came through the east window onto the kitchen table, or the smell of the hearth fire in winter. And in those moments, the warmth of the life that had been lived in this house came through the faded ink with a force that surprised her. The entry for August 12th, 1944 was a single line. James is gone. Lost at Leyte Gulf on the 25th of October, 1944. I am writing this in August 1945 because I could not write it before now. Zara held the journal carefully and did not move for a moment. She thought about the photograph in the locket. The young man in the suit with the white collar, looking at the camera with the formal solemnity of someone who understood the permanence of the moment. She thought about the iron crane still hanging in the firebox and the hearthstone under which Dot had kept what the heart could not carry. She turned the page and kept reading. The entries after August 1945 were different. Shorter, more widely spaced. The spare quality of Dot's voice, which had once been a kind of discipline, became something else, not despair exactly, but a narrowing, as if the range of what was worth recording had contracted. She wrote about the property, she wrote about the weather, she wrote about her work at the hospital, she wrote very little about herself. And then, in the spring of 1947, something changed. Entry dated April the 3rd, 1947. Pastor Elmore came to see me this morning. There is a situation at the church. An infant left in the vestibule 2 nights ago. No note, no name. A girl. The county is looking for placement. He asked if I would consider taking her while arrangements are made. I told him I would think about it. I have been thinking about it all day. Entry dated April 5th, 1947. I told Pastor Elmore yes. The entries that followed were the most alive writing in the entire journal. Dot had not been a demonstrative writer, had not allowed herself to be, but something about the child undid her reserve. The baby arrived in April unnamed, approximately 6 weeks old. Dot named her Clara. She wrote about Clara's weight in her arms and the particular sound she made when she was hungry and the way she tracked light across the ceiling with her eyes. She wrote about learning to manage the property in the hospital shifts and the baby simultaneously, about the neighbors who helped and the neighbors who talked and the ones she didn't care about either way. She wrote about Clara's first sounds and first attempts to roll over and first full sleep through the night. She wrote about the two of them in the evenings by the hearth fire. Clara in the crook of Dot's arm, the Vermont dark. Outside the windows, the particular quality of the warmth and the silence. And then in September 1950, the entry stopped for 3 months. When they resumed in December 1950, there was only this: they have taken Clara. The county says I am too old and too alone to be a suitable permanent placement. I am 62. I am alone. These things are true. I do not dispute that they are true. But I know what I know, and what I know is that child was mine, and I was hers, in the way that matters more than any county's paperwork, and whatever they say, that does not change. I will not write about this again. She did not. The remaining entries in the journal, sparse practical covering the years from 1951 to 1958, contain no further mention of Clara. They recorded the property, the seasons, the slow accumulation of age. The last entry was dated March 8th, 1958. I am leaving the Hargrove place today for the last time. I am 70 years old, and my hands are not strong enough for this work anymore. My nephew Gareth in Hartford has offered me a room, and I am taking it because there is no other sensible thing to do. I am leaving what is under the hearthstone for whoever comes next. The money is 40 years of savings and my wages from the hospital and what remained of the VA pension the Army sent me for James. The jewelry is what came from both our families and is worth more than I know how to say. I am leaving Clara's rosary too, which I carved for her myself from apple wood in the winter of 1948, and never gave to her because she was gone before it was finished. Whoever you are who finds this, I hope you needed it. I hope this house is good to you the way it was good to me, even through the hard years. Especially through the hard years. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry. I leave that for you too. Dorothy Calloway Hargrove, March 8th, 1958. Zara closed the journal very carefully. She held it in her lap and looked out through the broken window at the Vermont hillside in the October morning. The maples blazing red and orange and yellow against the pale sky. A crow moving through the far tree line. The well casing standing in the cleared ground in front of the house, with its rust-colored pump handle gone, but its stone coping still solid. She sat like that for a long time, not thinking exactly, just holding the weight of what she had read. Then she stood up and went to work. The first week in this Hargrove house was the hardest physical week of Zara's life. She had never done construction work. She had never done any kind of sustained manual labor. She was 18 years old and had spent her life in schools and coffee shops and her parents' house in Brookline, and her hands were not the hands of someone who knew how to use them for anything beyond writing and typing and the ordinary business of daily life. She started with what she could manage without tools or materials she didn't have. She swept the entire floor with a branch of broom sedge. She cut from the hillside, working methodically from the corners inward, raising clouds of dust that the October air carried out through the broken windows. She cleared the debris from the collapsed roof section, fallen slate, and rotten timber piling it outside the east wall. She pulled the wooden shutters from the window openings and assessed the frames. The frames themselves were intact, the mortise and tenon joinery still tight, only the glass and the hardware needing replacement. She tested the pine floorboard by board for rot, and found it sound throughout warped in several places, but not compromised. She cleaned the firebox of the hearth, sweeping out decades of fallen debris, and found the iron crane still mounted solid on its hook and the flue still open to the sky above. She could see a circle of pale blue at the top of the chimney, which meant the draw was likely still good. Each night, she slept against the north wall, beside the hearth, with her blanket and her jacket, and the cold was a fact she dealt with the way you deal with facts, not by resisting them, but by acknowledging them and continuing anyway. She ate granola bars and peanut butter crackers, which she had bought in Lindenville with the last of her money, and drank water from the stream that ran along the eastern edge of the property, which was cold and clean, and tasted of the granite hills it came from. On the fourth day, she walked into Lindenville. The town was 4 miles down the footpath and another half-mile along the county road, and Zara had done it once already when she arrived, but this time she walked it in the other direction downhill in the full October morning, and the difference was considerable. The path through the maples was extraordinary. She had grown up in a city and had not understood before this week what autumn in Vermont actually looked like from inside the forest, the light coming through the canopy in shifting amber-filtered columns. The forest floor, a deep layered carpet of fallen leaves in every shade from pale yellow to near black. The sound of her own footsteps absorbed and softened by the depth of it. She walked slowly and looked at everything and stored it the way she stored everything worth keeping. In Lindenville, she went to the hardware store on the main street and spent $40, nearly everything she had left, on a box of candles, a small flashlight, a tube of roofing sealant, and a basic toolkit, hammer, pry bar, handsaw, a roll of polyethylene sheeting for temporary roof repair. She was calculating as she bought each item, adding in her head, and when she got to the register, she was $6 short. She stood at the register and looked at her items and was deciding which to put back when the man behind the counter spoke. "You're the one who bought the Hargrove place." It was not a question. She looked up. He was in his mid-40s, heavy set with a flannel shirt, and a deliberate expression that was either skeptical or curious, and possibly both. "Yes," Zara said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he picked up the tube of roofing sealant and the flashlight and put them in the bag. "Take them," he said. "You can settle up when you have it." She looked at him. "Ruth Fenwick called ahead," he said, and turned back to the register. This was how Zara learned that small towns operate on a different economy than cities. An economy of information and obligation, and the particular kind of trust that extends carefully to strangers who have demonstrated by their presence that they intend to stay. Ruth had not called ahead in any official capacity. She had simply mentioned to whoever she mentioned things to that a young woman from Boston had come to take on the Hargrove place and appeared to mean it. That information had moved through Lindenville the way information moves through small towns, quietly, thoroughly, in all directions, simultaneously. And what it produced was not charity exactly, but a kind of provisional acceptance. The hardware store man gave her the sealant and the flashlight on credit. The woman at the general store gave her a bag of apples from a neighbor's tree and refused payment. The proprietor of Pearlie's Diner gave her a bowl of soup and a piece of bread and said she could wash dishes for an hour if she felt she needed to square it. And Zara washed dishes for an hour and then sat in the window booth for another hour with her journal and wrote 4 pages of notes about the town and the morning and the feeling of being somewhere that was beginning, tentatively and on its own terms, to make room for her. It was in the diners that she first heard the name Emmett Briard. The woman at the counter, large, efficient, with a voice that carried, was talking to a regular about the old Hargrove property, about the girl from Boston who had taken it on, and the regular, a man in his 70s with a hunting vest and a cup of coffee he had been working on for 40 minutes, said that if she was serious about fixing that place, she needed to talk to Emmett Briard. Emmett Briard, said the counterwoman, with the tone of someone acknowledging a difficult truth. Is there a reason that sounds complicated? Zara asked from the window booth. They both looked at her. The regular studied her for a moment. Emmett's the only man in 3 counties who still does traditional fieldstone work. The old way, he said. If you want to fix those walls and that chimney properly, you need him. He paused. He's also the most stubborn individual currently living in Vermont, and that is not a low bar. Where do I find him? Zara asked. The regular told her. A property 2 miles north of Lindenville on the Kirby Road, with a gray mailbox and a hand-painted sign that said Briard Restoration, and a border collie that would hear her coming before she reached the driveway. Zara walked to Emmett Briard's property the following morning. The border collie heard her at the gate, exactly as predicted, appearing from behind the barn, with the specific, focused intensity of a dog that takes its responsibilities seriously. It circled her twice, without barking, decided something, and sat down at her heel. She took this as an encouraging sign. Emmett Briard was in the side yard splitting wood. He was 68 years old, broad-shouldered, weathered in the way of men who have spent most of their adult lives outdoors with gray hair cut short and hands that looked like they could close around a stone and hold it still. He set the axe down when he saw her and waited while she crossed the yard. She told him why she was there. He listened without expression. The Hargrove place, he said when she finished. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. I know the Hargrove place, he said. I tried to buy it myself in 2019. He paused. I drove out there and parked at the county road and walked the path and got within sight of the house and turned around. She looked at him. Why? He shook his head slightly. Not a refusal to answer. More like an honest acknowledgement that the answer was not quite available to him in language. I'm not the right person for it, he said. That's the best I can put it. Zara reached into her canvas bag and took out the oilcloth bundle, still carefully wrapped, and handed it to him. I found this under the hearthstone, she said. He took it, looked at it, handed it back. Open it, she said. Please look at the journal. He unwrapped the oilcloth on the splitting stump carefully, with hands that knew how to handle old things. He picked up the journal and opened it and read the first entry. He turned pages. He read slowly. Zara waited. He stopped at a page near the middle and did not turn it for a long time. He looked up at her. His expression had changed in a way she could not quite categorize. James Hargrove, he said. Yes, Zara said. He was lost at Lady Gulf in 1944. Emmett was quiet. There's a war memorial on the Lindenville town green, he said. A granite marker. Names of every Caledonia County man who died in the Second World War. James Hargrove is on that stone. He paused. I've walked past that stone 5 days a week for 30 years. I stop in front of it most mornings. He looked at the journal in his hands and then back at Zara. I didn't know he had a wife still living here. I didn't know anything about him except his name on the stone. He closed the journal carefully and held it for a moment. What do you need? He asked. The roof first, Zara said. Then the chimney. Then the windows. I can do interior work myself if you teach me what I need to know for the stonework. He was quiet again. He looked at the journal in his hands. He set it down on the splitting stump and picked up his axe and stood it against the wood pile and looked at the middle distance for a moment in the way of a man making a decision he had not expected to be making today. I'm not going to charge you, he said. His voice was level. Not a gesture, not magnanimity, just a statement of fact. I've been walking past James Hargrove's name on that stone for 30 years. This is something I can do about that. Zara looked at him. Thank you, she said. He nodded. I'll be at the property Monday morning, 6 o'clock. He picked up the axe and went back to splitting wood, and the border collie walked Zara back to the gate and sat watching her go down the road until she was out of sight. She was halfway back to the Hargrove property, the afternoon sun cutting long gold lines through the maple canopy, when she heard footsteps on the path behind her. She turned. An elderly woman was coming along the path at a deliberate pace, wearing a heavy canvas coat and rubber boots and carrying a covered dish in both hands. She was perhaps 80 years old, compact, with white hair, and the particular focused energy of someone who has outlasted a great deal and intends to outlast more. You're the girl from Boston? She said when she reached Zara. Yes, ma'am. Yes. Agnes Pruitt. She nodded toward the uphill path. I live a mile that way. Have done for 63 years. She held out the covered dish. Shepherd's pie. You look like you haven't had a proper meal since you arrived. Zara took the dish. Thank you. Agnes fell into step beside her on the path. They walked in silence for a moment, the afternoon light moving through the trees. I knew Dot Hargrove, Agnes said. Zara slowed slightly and looked at her. I was 17 when she moved away, Agnes said. She'd been my neighbor my whole life. My mother used to send me over with things same as I'm doing now. Agnes was quiet for a moment. A tall woman. Quiet like you. Kept her own counsel. After James died, she was different the way people are different after that kind of loss. But she kept going. She was good at keeping going. They walked. There was something else, Zara said after a moment. Something in the journal. About a child. A baby girl she took in 1947. She named her Clara. Agnes was quiet for several steps. Then she said I was there the morning Pastor Elmore came to ask her. Zara did not say anything. I was 18, Agnes said. I used to come sit with Dot in the evening sometimes. She was lonely, though she'd never have said so. I was there when the pastor came and asked about the baby, and I was there 3 days later when he brought her. She paused. Dot loved that child, Agnes said. I don't have another way to put it. She was 62 years old, a widow alone on a hill property in northern Vermont, and she loved that little girl the way some people love a thing they didn't know they were waiting for. She paused again. When the county came for Clara in 1950, Dot didn't fight them because she knew she couldn't win. But something went out of her that day that didn't come back. They had reached the cleared ground in front of the Hargrove house. Agnes looked at the house for a moment. She never talked about Clara after Agnes said, "Not once in the 8 years she was still here. But I think about her every time I walk past this place. I think Dot never stopped thinking about her either." She looked at Zara. "I think she left whatever she left under that hearthstone for that child, even knowing the child would never come back. Because some things need to be set down somewhere, even if you're not sure who will find them." She looked at the house a moment longer. "I've been waiting 63 years to see who this house would choose," she said. She looked at Zara. "I think it chose well." She turned and went back down the path, and Zara stood in the cleared ground in front of the Hargrove house with the shepherd's pie in her hands and watched her go. And the evening was coming in fast and cold from the north, and the sky above the maple ridge was the deep clear blue that comes just before the first stars appear. She went inside and lit a candle and sat at the hearth and ate Agnes's shepherd's pie, warm from the dish, and read Dot's journal again from the beginning. She read it more slowly this time. She stopped at different places. She was looking for something she had not been looking for the first time, and she found it in the way that you find things you're looking for, not in a single moment, but in an accumulation, each line adding to the one before it, until the shape of the thing became clear. Dot Hargrove had loved this house, not simply as property, not simply as shelter, but as a place where life happened, where James had come home, to where Clara had learned to track light across the ceiling, where the hearth fire burned on winter evenings, and the maple trees turned in October, and the well water ran cold and clean in summer. She had loved it the way you love a thing that has held you through everything and has not failed. And when she could not stay in it anymore, she had not abandoned it. She had left it everything she had. She had trusted it to hold what she could not carry, and she had trusted whoever came next to know what to do with it. Zara sat with that for a long time. Outside, the Vermont night pressed close and cold against the stone walls, and through the covered roof section above her, the stars were beginning to appear clear and numerous in the cold October sky. The candle on the mantel shelf threw a warm, moving circle of light across the granite walls, and the hearthstone in front of her gleamed faintly where she had cleaned it, and the oilcloth bundle sat on the shelf where she had set it, the rosary and the tin box, and the journal, and the loose weight of the jewelry. Zara opened her own journal on her knee and uncapped her pen. She wrote for 2 hours. Emmett Briard arrived at 6 o'clock on Monday morning, exactly as he said he would, coming up the footpath in the gray pre-dawn with a canvas tool bag over one shoulder and a thermos of coffee in his hand and the border collie at his heel. Zara heard him on the path before she saw him and was already standing in the doorway when he came over the rise. He stopped and looked at the house in the early light. He looked at it the way a person looks at something they have been thinking about for a long time. Then he set his tool bag down on the flat doorstep stone and walked the perimeter of the house, slowly touching the walls as he went, pressing his fingers into the mortar, at intervals leaning back to look at the roofline and the chimney from different angles. He did not speak while he was doing this. Zara did not interrupt him. When he came back around to the front, he stood with his hands on his hips and looked at the damaged roof section. "The walls are sound," he said. "The mortar's failing in places, but the stones haven't moved. You can see by the verticals nothing's shifted since it was laid." He looked at the chimney. "The top course on the east side needs rebuilding. 3 or 4 courses down from the cap." He paused. "The rest of it is original, and it's good." "How long will the roof take?" Zara asked. He calculated, without appearing to calculate, looking at the damaged section with the particular focused attention of someone whose assessments are made from deep experience rather than conscious deliberation. "A week if the weather holds," he said. "I'll need to source matching slate. There's a reclamation yard in St. Johnsbury that may have Vermont slate from the right period. He picked up his tool bag. We'll start with the temporary sheeting today to get the interior out of the weather. Then we pull the damaged section back to solid structure and go from there. Zara noted. She spent that first day on the roof with Emmett, which was not something she had anticipated and was not something she had any experience with, and was consequently one of the most frightening and instructive days of her life. Emmett did not coddle and did not explain more than once, and did not treat the height or the angle of the roof as things requiring special acknowledgement. He showed her how to move on the slope, where to put her weight, how to use the roof brackets he drove into the solid sheathing below the surviving slate. He showed her how to handle the polyethylene sheeting and how to fasten it tight over the open section with battens nailed through the sheeting into the sheathing below. They worked from first light until the afternoon went gray and cold, and by the end of the day, the open section of the roof was covered, and the interior of the Hargrove house was for the first time in years protected from the weather. Zara climbed down the ladder at the end of the day with hands that were bruised and stiff, and a back that had opinions about roof slopes, and stood in the cleared ground and looked at the house and felt something that she did not have a quick word for. Pride was part of it. But it was larger than pride. It was the feeling of having done a thing that was real, a thing that had changed the physical condition of something that mattered with her own hands and her own effort. She had not known before this week that this feeling existed, or that she was capable of it. Emmett poured 2 cups of coffee from his thermos and handed her one without comment. They stood side by side in the cooling afternoon and drank their coffee and looked at the house. James Hargrove's wife, Emmett said after a while. He was not speaking to her exactly, more to himself or to the house or to whatever part of the morning's work had carried him back to the name on the Lindenville Memorial Stone. He shook his head slightly. 60 years I've lived in this county. You think you know a place? You can't know what you haven't been shown, Zara said. He looked at her, considered that. No, he said. I suppose you can't. The work settled into a rhythm over the following weeks. Emmett came 3 or 4 days a week, arriving at 6 and working until the light failed, and Zara worked every day, whether he was there or not. She learned to mix lime mortar, the traditional formula. Emmett used hydrated lime and coarse sand and water, worked to a consistency he described as like thick cream, not thin paint, and he was not a man who accepted approximations. She learned the technique called repointing, working the old failed mortar from the joints with a narrow chisel and repacking them with fresh mix, pressing the mortar in with her fingers, and a small wooden tool Emmett had made himself, finishing the joint flush with the stone face. It was slow and exacting work, and she was bad at it at first. The mortar shrank wrong, or the joints were not flush, or she worked too fast, and the mix dried before she had finished a section. Emmett corrected her without impatience, showing the same thing 2 or 3 times, without any indication that the repetition was a burden. He had the teaching manner of someone who understood that skill was built by accumulation, and that the only path through was through. By the 3rd week, she was competent. By the 5th week, she was good. The reclamation yard in St. Johnsbury had Vermont slate from a demolished schoolhouse in Barton, dating from 1902, which was close enough in origin and thickness to the Hargrove roof slate to satisfy Emmett's standards. He sourced enough for the damaged section, and they relayed it, course by course, Emmett setting each slate, and Zara passing them up from the staging below. The 2 of them working in a silence that had by then become comfortable. The silence of people who have established a shared understanding of what the work requires and do not need to negotiate it out loud. The chimney rebuild took 2 full days. The east side of the top four courses had to come down stone by stone, each stone cleaned and reset in the original order, the new mortar matched to the color of the old, so that the repair did not announce itself. Emmett believed strongly that good restoration work should be invisible, that a repaired thing should look like an uninjured thing, and that visible repairs were a form of disrespect to the original builder. Zara came to share this view. She worked on the interior while Emmett worked on the exterior structure. She scrubbed the pine floor on her hands and knees with a soft brush and warm water, working section by section, the decades of accumulated grime coming up in long dark streaks, and the pale honey color of the original wood emerging beneath. She cleaned the granite walls with the same method, working with a soft brush and water alone, no chemicals, letting the stone breathe. She ordered glass for the two window openings from a glazier in St. Johnsbury and reinstalled the original frames with new hardware. She rebuilt the wooden mantel shelf, which had cracked along its length, gluing and clamping it, and finishing it with linseed oil until the wood went dark and warm and solid. She kept Dot's journal in the rosary and the locket on the mantel shelf while she worked as if they were watching. Agnes came twice a week with food and conversation. She was a precise and unsparing observer, with a memory for detail that impressed Zara enormously. She could describe the color of a dress Dot Hargrove had worn to church in 1953, the exact phrasing of a remark made over a fence in the summer of 1948, the particular quality of the light on a given October afternoon 60 years ago. She sat in the one chair Zara had acquired, a ladderback from the St. Johnsbury Salvation Army thrift store, $3, and talked while Zara worked, and Zara listened and wrote in her journal in the evenings everything Agnes had said. Those conversations became the material for the first real poem Zara wrote in the Hargrove house. She had been making notes since she arrived, fragments and observations and lines that presented themselves at unexpected moments in the middle of repointing a wall or carrying slate up the hill from where Emmett's truck was parked at the county road, or lying awake in the pre-dawn dark listening to the Vermont woods settle into morning. But these were notes, not poems. The poems came later after she had heard enough of Agnes's voice and had spent enough time with Dot's journal and had given the place enough of herself that it began to give something back. The first real poem was about the hearthstone, about the weight of it and what was under it, and the particular quality of the gap along its front edge, the deliberate crafted quality of a thing made to be moved when the time was right. She wrote it at the mantel in the early morning, with her journal open and the October light coming through the new window glass and the fire she had started in the restored hearth burning low and warm behind her. She wrote it in one sitting and did not revise it, which almost never happened, and which she recognized as a sign that the poem had come from somewhere deeper than craft. She wrote about James Hargrove next, about a man she had never met and knew only from a name on a memorial stone, and a woman's careful grief record, and a photograph in a locket. She wrote about Leyte Gulf, about the particular quality of absence that a war death creates, not present, not entirely gone, but somewhere unreachable, and the way that unreachability had organized Dot's entire subsequent life around waiting for something that was not coming back. She wrote about her grandmother. This was the poem she had been circling since before she arrived in Vermont, since before she left Boston, since the morning she had walked down the front steps of her parents' house with a suitcase she had not packed. She had known it was there, but had not been ready for it, the way you are not ready for certain things until the circumstances have arranged themselves into the right shape. The Hargrove house, she understood now, was the right shape. the hearth fire and the granite walls and Dot's journal and Agnes's voice and the ring on her right index finger and the ring in the tin box on the mantel shelf, all of it together had made the shape she needed to write about Nkichi. She wrote about sitting in the backyard in Brookline, listening to her grandmother read Frost and Whitman in the September afternoons. She wrote about the ring and what Nkichi had said about rings knowing things. She wrote about not being allowed to go to Lagos for the funeral and the thing that had broken in her that had never quite healed. She wrote about the specific quality of a love that does not require you to be anything other than what you are, and how rare that love is, and how it does not leave you even when the person who gave it is gone, and how it was exactly that love that had brought her to a hillside in Vermont in October to spend her savings on a stone house that had been waiting for her. It was the best poem she had ever written, and she knew it when she finished it. Not with satisfaction exactly, but with the particular exhaustion of having done something true. On a Thursday morning in early November, Emmett drove her to Burlington. He had suggested it the week before, with the casualness of a man who had thought about it carefully before speaking. He knew a woman at the Burlington auction house who handled estate jewelry and historical objects, he said. It might be worth having the contents of the tin box assessed. The auction house was in a brick building on Church Street, a narrow space with good lighting and glass cases, and the quiet, focused atmosphere of a place that takes beautiful old things seriously. The woman Emmett knew was named Patricia, in her 50s, with reading glasses on a cord around her neck, and the deliberate hands of someone accustomed to handling things carefully. Patricia laid the contents of the tin box out on a cloth on the assessment table and examined each piece in turn. She worked with a loop and a small light, making brief notes in a pad. Zara watched her face and could not read it, which she found both frustrating and reassuring. When Patricia reached the brooch, she paused. She looked at it under the loop for a long time. Then she set it down and took her reading glasses off and looked at Zara. "Where did you find this?" Zara explained. Patricia put her reading glasses back on and looked at the brooch again. "This piece," she said carefully, "was made by a goldsmith named Jacob Weisberg. He worked in New York in the Lower East Side from approximately 1928 to 1942. He was known for a particular style of filigree work, extremely fine, the wire gauge much thinner than was standard for the period, and for engraving his pieces with his maker's mark on the inner clasp surface." She held the brooch under the light. "There is the mark, JW within a small oval. His signature." She set the loop down. "Jacob Weisberg disappeared in 1942, she said. "His workshop was closed. His family lost contact with him. After the war, his surviving relatives attempted to reconstruct what had become of his pieces. Many of his works appeared in collections under other names, having passed through the wartime dispersal of Jewish property in ways that were not always voluntary or documented. His family lodged a list of known pieces with the Holocaust Museum in Washington in 2003. She paused. "I have seen this piece before, not in person. In a photograph in that list." The room was very quiet. Zara looked at the brooch. It was a small thing. Delicate, a spray of gold wire formed into a stylized flower with a tiny pearl at the center, engraved on the back in letters so small she had not noticed them before DC 1937. Dorothy Calloway's initials. Her year of purchase or receipt. "How did Dot get it?" Zara asked. Patricia considered. New York would be the most probable connection. A purchase, a gift. Jewish goldsmiths in the Lower East Side sold to a wide clientele, especially for special occasion pieces. Your Dorothy Calloway may have bought this on a visit to New York, or received it as a gift, possibly around the time of her marriage or shortly before. She had no way of knowing what would happen to the man who made it. She took off her reading glasses entirely and set them on the table. The right thing to do, she said, is to contact the museum. The Weisberg family has been trying to account for his pieces for 20 years. This would mean a great deal to them. I know, Zara said. She picked up the brooch carefully and turned it in her fingers. She looked at the engraved initials and the year. She looked at the maker's mark on the clasp. She thought about a man in a workshop on the Lower East Side forming gold wire into flowers in 1937, and the woman who had carried his work to Vermont and put it under a hearthstone for safekeeping, and the 60 years between that act and this moment. I'll contact them, Zara said. I'm not selling it. I'm giving it back. Patricia looked at her for a moment with an expression that was a not quite surprise and not quite approval, but something in the neighborhood of both. The remaining pieces, she said, returning to the professional matter of assessment. The garnet earrings and the gold chain and the band ring. These are not museum quality pieces, but they are genuine period gold. Well made, the garnets good quality. Together they would fetch between $16,000 and $19,000 at auction. The locket is personal rather than valuable. I'd keep it if I were you. Keep it if I... Zara kept the locket. She kept the ring with the blue stone as well, which she put on a gold chain she bought for $4 at the St. Johnsbury thrift store, and hung around her neck alongside the chain, where Dot's ring now rested 2 rings from 2 women she had never met, carried forward by a hearth that had known how to wait. She sold the garnet earrings and the gold chain at auction 3 weeks later for $17,200. She called the Holocaust Museum in Washington the same week and spoke with a woman in the Provenance research department named Dr. Leibowitz, who listened to Zara's account of finding the brooch with a quiet attention that Zara recognized as the attention of someone for whom this kind of call was not routine. Dr. Leibowitz explained that the Weisberg family, Jacob's granddaughter, and her children living in Maryland, had been notified, and that if Zara was willing to surrender the piece voluntarily, it could be transferred through the museum to the family directly. There would be no financial compensation required, but the family wished to express their gratitude. I don't need compensation, Zara said. I need the piece to go where it belongs. There was a brief silence on the line. Then Dr. Leibowitz said, the family would like to meet you if you're willing, when the transfer is arranged. Zara said she was willing. The story appeared in the Burlington Free Press on a Thursday morning in December. A small piece, 3 columns below the fold on the front page of the local section, Young Boston Poet Finds Holocaust Era. Treasure in Vermont Farmhouse Returns. Brooch to Goldsmith's family. The reporter had called Zara on the previous Tuesday, and she had answered his questions carefully, and the piece was accurate and restrained, and contained a photograph of Zara standing in front of the Hargrove house, the repaired roof visible behind her. The chimney straight against the pale December sky, the granite walls showing the fresh mortar work in the joints, and a separate photograph of the brooch. Ruth Fenwick called that afternoon. People are talking about you, she said in a tone that indicated this was information rather than warning. I've had 3 people in the office today who have never in my memory shown any interest whatsoever in the Hargrove property asking about the girl who bought it. She paused. I thought you should know. Zara thanked her and went back to work. She was finishing the window trim on the interior that week, fitting the new pine casings Emmett had milled from a fallen tree on the property's eastern edge, fitting and nailing and priming in the short December light. The letter arrived on a Monday, 10 days after the Burlington Free Press piece ran. It came in a plain envelope, handwritten with a Hartford, Connecticut return address. The handwriting was the deliberate, slightly effortful handwriting of someone elderly. Zara opened it at the mantel shelf in the morning with the hearth fire going and her coffee cup warm in her hand. The letter was 2 pages written on both sides of the paper in the same careful hand. It began, "My name is Rosalind Whitmore. I am 77 years old and I live in Hartford, Connecticut. I am writing because I read the story in the Burlington Free Press about the girl who bought the Hargrove farmhouse in Caledonia County, Vermont. And I need to ask you something. I was born in 1947. I do not know where I was born or who my parents were. What I know is that in the spring of 1947, I was left at a church in Lindenville, Vermont, and that a woman named Dorothy Hargrove took me in and cared for me for 3 years and named me Clara, and that when I was 3 years old, the state of Vermont removed me from her care and placed me in a different home. I have been looking for information about Dorothy Hargrove for 60 years. I did not know her last name until I was in my 40s and was able to access my placement records. After that, I searched for any record of her and found very little. She died in Hartford in 1971, 13 years after I was placed out, and I did not know she had come to Hartford until after I had already moved away. I did not know where she had lived before Hartford or what had become of her house. When I read the story in the Free Press and saw the name Hargrove in the photograph of the house, I sat down and could not stand up for a while. If you have found anything in that house that belonged to Dorothy Hargrove, I would be very grateful to know about it. I am not asking for property or money. I am asking to know about her. I have been asking that question my whole life. Zara read the letter twice. She set it down on the mantel shelf beside Dot's journal. She stood in front of the hearth with her coffee cup going cold in her hands and looked at the fire for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the number on the letter's header. Rosalind Whitmore answered on the third ring. Her voice was careful, measured with the particular quality of a person who has learned not to allow herself too much anticipation. Mrs. Whitmore, Zara said, "My name is Zara Adiemi. I bought the Hargrove farmhouse in October. I found Dorothy Hargrove's journal under the hearthstone." A silence. Then quietly, she kept a journal. "Yes," Zara said. "From 1941 to 1958. She wrote about you?" "Quite a bit." Another silence. Longer. "She wrote about me?" "Yes." Zara heard the quality of that silence and understood what was in it, and did not fill it with anything. She waited. After a moment, Rosalind Whitmore said, "I'm in Hartford. That's about 3 hours from you, I think." About that, Zara said, "You're welcome to come whenever you want. There's a lot to read." Rosalind came on a Saturday 3 weeks before Christmas. She drove herself, which Zara had not expected, and pulled off the county road and walked the 4 mile path alone, arriving at the house in the mid morning with a slight breathlessness that was more emotion than exertion, and a canvas bag over her shoulder. She was a small woman, 77 years old, with white hair and dark eyes, and the careful, composed manner of someone who has managed difficult feelings for a very long time. She stopped on the path when the house came into view over the rise and stood there for a moment without speaking. Zara waited by the door. Rosalind came the rest of the way up the path and stopped in front of the house and looked at it. She looked at the walls and the repaired roof and the straight chimney and the new glass in the windows and the cleared ground where the wild roses had been cut back to show the old garden fence line. She looked at the flat doorstep stone with its hollow worn by a century of feet. She was here, Rosalind said. This was her place. "Yes," Zara said. "Come inside." The fire was going in the hearth. The room was warm, the granite walls holding the heat, the way stone does, slowly accumulated, slowly released, and the morning light coming through the east window fell across the pine floor in a long, warm bar. Dot's journal was on the mantel shelf where it lived, and the rosary beside it, and the locket and Zara's own journals stacked at the end. The room smelled of wood smoke and linseed oil, and the particular clean cold of Vermont winter held just outside the walls. Rosalind stood in the middle of the room and looked at the hearth. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said. "It's the biggest thing in the room," Zara said. "It was designed that way." This was the center of the house for everything. Rosalind walked to the hearth and stood in front of it and put her hand on the hearthstone the way Zara had done on her first afternoon. Palm flat on the cold granite. She stood like that for a moment. Then Zara took the journal from the mantel shelf and held it out to her. Rosalind took it with both hands. She held it for a moment before opening it the way you hold something before you are ready to open it, feeling its weight and age and the fact of it. Then she opened it to the first page and read Dot's name in the faded ink and was quiet. Zara put another piece of wood on the fire and sat in the ladder-back chair and let Rosalind read. She read for a long time. Zara made tea and left a cup on the mantel beside her. The morning moved. The fire settled and was replenished. Outside, the December light was thin and clear. The maple ridge bare now, the hills showing their bone structure beneath the stripped branches. Inside the room was warm and quiet, and Rosalind stood at the mantel and read Dorothy Hargrove's journal from the first page to the last. When she reached the entry from December 1950, the single paragraph about Clara being taken, she stopped for a long time. She did not make a sound. She simply stood very still with the journal open in her hands and looked at the page. Then she turned to the last entry from March 1958 and read it through. She closed the journal. She stood with it closed in her hands and her eyes on the fire and did not speak for a while. Zara did not speak either. "She remembered me," Rosalind said finally. Her voice was steady and quiet. 60 years. I wondered if she did. I was 3 years old when they took me. I didn't remember her face. I didn't know her name for 40 years. But I always wondered if she remembered. She kept everything for you, Zara said. The rosary she carved, the money, all of it. Rosalind looked at the rosary on the mantel shelf. She looked at it for a long time. "She made this," Zara said, "in the winter of 1948. She wrote that she never got to give it to you because you were gone before she finished it." Rosalind reached out and picked up the rosary. She held it in both hands, the dark wooden beads, and the small brass crucifix, the wood worn smooth only at the crucifix top where Dot had held it in the decades since. She turned it slowly in her fingers. "Applewood," Zara said. She wrote that she made it from applewood. Rosalind held the rosary and looked at the fire, and after a while she said very quietly, "I have been carrying a question my whole life. And now here's the answer 70 years late, sitting in a house on a hillside in Vermont." Zara looked at her. "The answer is that she didn't forget," Rosalind said. She looked at Zara. "Do you know what it means to carry a question that long?" Zara thought about her grandmother's ring on her finger. She thought about the night she had sat in front of her father's email screen in the quiet Brookline house and understood what her parents had done and what it meant. She thought about the morning she had walked down the front steps with a suitcase she had not packed and turned left and not looked back. "Yes," she said. "I think I know a little." "No." Rosalind looked at her with the full attention of someone who has learned to recognize when something is true. Then she said, "I want to hear your story too." So Zara told her. She told her about her grandmother Nkichi and the ring and the journals and the writing. She told her about the Alderton acceptance and the emails she had found on her father's screen and the morning of her 18th birthday. She told her about the hostel and the $180, and the Vermont Rural Heritage Preservation Act listing on the 5th page of results. She told her about Ruth Finnick in the 4-mile footpath, and the first night in the cold, with the rain coming through the roof, and about pressing down on the far edge of the hearthstone and feeling it rock. She told her about Emmett and Agnes, and the work of the past 2 months, and the brooch and the auction and the poems. Rosalind listened the way she had read the journal completely without interruption, with the full focus of someone who understands that some stories require that quality of attention. When Zara finished, Rosalind was quiet for a moment. Your grandmother told you the ring would take you somewhere you didn't expect, she said. Yes. Rosalind looked at the ring on Zara's right index finger. Then she looked at the ring on the chain around Zara's neck. Dot's ring, the blue stone, deep and clear. 2 rings, she said. 2 rings, Zara said. Rosalind looked at the fire. Dot didn't have family, she said. Not after James. Not after they took Clara. She had Agnes down the road, and the people at the hospital and the house. And then she went to Hartford and died there in 1971, and I was already gone, and I never knew. She paused. I didn't have family either. Not real family. I was moved 3 times in the foster system before I aged out. I built a life. I have friends. I have a good life. But there is a particular kind of alone that doesn't go away, and I have always known it. She looked at Zara. You found the thing she left for me, she said. You found it, and you returned the brooch to the people it belonged to, and you fixed her house, and you built her fire. And when I wrote a letter to a stranger in Vermont asking about a woman I spent my whole life looking for, you called me the same day and told me to come. She paused. Dot said whoever found this place would be someone the house chose. She looked around the room, the warm granite walls, the repaired ceiling, the new window glass holding the December light, the fire in the great hearth. She looked back at Zara. I think she chose well. Rosalind stayed through the afternoon. Agnes came at 2 o'clock, as she sometimes did on Saturdays, and recognized immediately that something significant had happened in the room, and sat down in the ladder back chair and listened while Rosalind told her story. Agnes, who was not a woman who showed emotion, easily sat through most of it with her hands in her lap and her eyes on the fire, and when Rosalind finished, Agnes said very quietly, I was 18 years old when they took you from her. I watched Dot come back across the field afterward and go inside and close the door and not come out until the following morning. I always thought she should have fought harder. But she was 62 and alone, and it was 1950, and fighting was not a thing. Women in her position could do and win. She looked at Rosalind. She thought about you every day until she left here, Agnes said. I know that because I knew her face, and her face was different after you were gone. Not broken. Dot was not a woman who broke, but different. Rosalind held the rosary in her lap and did not speak for a moment. Then she said, I'd like to come back if that's all right. When the weather breaks in the spring, you're welcome whenever you want to come, Zara said. Rosalind looked at her steadily. You're 18 years old, she said. Yes. And you're staying. Yes, Zara said. I'm staying. The tapping chores of early December were finished by Christmas. The roof was tight, and the chimney was straight, and the windows were glazed, and the walls were repointed, and the floor was clean. The hearth fire burned every day from October onward, peat and hardwood, the draw strong and clean, up the restored flue, the heat building slowly in the granite walls and radiating back through the night. The well had tested clean and cold at a lab in St. Johnsbury. The property's cleared half acre showed beneath the cutback growth the evidence of the kitchen garden. Dot had kept raised stone borders, an old compost area, the iron stake of a long gone fence that had once protected vegetables from the deer. The Green Mountain Review, a literary journal published out of Burlington, accepted 3 of Zara's poems in the first week of December. The email from the editor came on a Tuesday morning while she was repainting the interior window trim, and she read it 3 times standing on a step stool with a paintbrush in her hand, and then stood very still for a moment and let the thing be real. She wrote to her parents that evening. Not an email. A letter handwritten on paper she had bought in Lindenville. She told them where she was, she told them what she had found, and what she had done. She told them about Dot's journal and the hearth, and Rosalind Whitmore, and the poems the Green Mountain Review had accepted. She did not ask for forgiveness. She did not offer it either. She simply told them what her life looked like from a hillside in Vermont in December, and she told them that she was well, and she signed the letter with her name. She was not ready for what came next, whatever it was. She had not decided yet if she wanted a next in that direction. But she had learned in the months since October that some things need to be set down somewhere, rather than carried, and the letter was a way of setting something down. Her parents called on a Sunday evening 2 weeks later. She was sitting at the mantel writing when her phone rang. She looked at the screen for a moment. She touched the turquoise ring on her right index finger. Then she answered. The conversation was not easy and was not complete. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning, and beginnings are not the same as resolutions, and Zara understood the difference clearly enough not to mistake one for the other. Her father spoke carefully, and her mother spoke carefully, and nobody said the things that were hardest to say. And Zara listened to the voices she had grown up with coming through her phone in a warm room in Vermont, and felt something that was complicated and real and did not need to be simplified. She told them she was staying. She told them she had a roof and a fire and work she believed in. She told them she was well. When the call ended, she sat for a long time in front of the hearth with her journal open on her knee. Outside, the Vermont night was hard and clear and cold, the stars burning with winter sharpness above the maple ridge, the snow that had fallen the previous week lying white and still on the hillside and on the roof of the Hargrove house and on the flat doorstep, stone where generations of feet had worn a shallow bowl. The hearth fire was low and steady. The granite walls held the warmth. The rosary in the journal and the locket sat on the mantel shelf in the firelight, as they had sat there since October, 100 yards from the hearthstone under which they had waited 60 years for someone to find them. Zara looked at the turquoise ring on her right index finger. She looked at the ring on the chain around her neck. Dot's ring, the blue stone catching the firelight. She thought about what Agnes had said on the first afternoon, standing in front of the house in the October light. I've been waiting 63 years to see who this house would choose. She thought about the note the previous visitor had left. There's something in this house that's waiting. I'm not who it's waiting for. She thought about what Dot had written in her last entry on a March morning in 1958, when she was 70 years old and leaving for the last time. The cottage will know you if you deserve to stay. Zara was 18 years old and had been asked to leave the house she grew up in. She had spent her last dollar on a stone house on a hill in Vermont that had been waiting 67 years. She had found what the house was keeping and had given back what needed to go back and kept what needed to stay. She had repaired the roof and the chimney and the walls and the floor and lit the fire in the hearth and sat at the mantel and written poems that were true. She opened her journal and wrote the first line of a new poem. The hearth holds what the heart cannot carry, and the heart in time learns what to carry back.